Welcome to Astana, also known as Nur Sultan. The capital city of Kazakhstan recently had its name changed from Astana to Nur Sultan. And even though the new name is the official name, the old name, Astana, still is widely used by locals. You know, it's hard to change things like that. So I'm going to kind of alternate names through this video as I talk about this place. As you can see immediately in this video, it's a pretty interesting looking city, pretty futuristic looking city.
That pyramid looking structure in the back there, that's actually a shopping center. Yeah, shopping and entertainment center, that's the pyramid. And then immediately ahead, you can have a good look at one of the main walking streets in Nur Sultan.
It's Friday afternoon right now, almost 6 p.m. So you can see more and more people entering the streets, you know, end of the work week. It's a good time to be alive. And when I compare this city here to, for example, Turkestan in the far south of the country, where I was yesterday afternoon, I mean, it feels like two completely different worlds. The style of dress is different, the architecture is different. Turkestan definitely didn't have these strange looking glass guys. And look at that, we even have English on the sign. Yet another indication that we are in a much more international city than we were in before. Wow, look at these buildings in front of me. That white and blue one looks like something out of Star Wars or Star Trek or something from space, basically, is what I'm trying to say. I also see a lot of Kazakh people walking around, taking photos, taking videos. Because as you can imagine, for the people from other cities, this is also something very different, very new. But without a doubt, the most futuristic and space-like looking building in Astana is that one. It's an interesting looking ice cream stand behind me. 250 tenge for an ice cream. Less than $1. Actually, that's probably worth mentioning as well. Despite the appearance that Nur Sultan has more money and is maybe a more expensive city, I mean, the prices seem to be, still very affordable. Definitely cheaper than most cities in Europe or North America, that is for sure. You know, I've never been to mainland China, but this is kind of what I imagine China feeling like. Just a lot of new buildings, kind of like some strange, unknown characteristic to the city. Very pretty places. So I would say this city is like an interesting mix between the modern Asian city, you know, a place like China or Singapore or something like that. But also, of course, it has the distinct Central Asian Soviet influence, the Russian influence, which you see not only in the language, but also in some subtle ways in the style, in the culture itself. Yes, I have YouTube channel. The name is The New Travel. I can tell it for you. The New Travel.
Then?
Yes.
Жига.
Jiga.
Да, Жига.
I am photographer. Yeah?
Да.
Okay.
Wedding party.
You do wedding photos. Wedding photographer.
I am working photographer and love story.
Wow, another ice cream place. I'll tell ya, if Estania is the city of the future has a lot of ice cream. There is a tradition in Kazakhstan that I just recently learned about. When you are drinking tea with someone, it's tradition not to fill the cup to the top. Because if you fill the cup to the top, that's telling your guests, drink this tea and then it's time to go. Instead, you fill the cup halfway. And the message is different. The message says, drink your tea, and as many times as you need it, I will refill it halfway. I will refill it halfway. I will refill it halfway. It's a sign of hospitality. And as I end my trip in Kazakhstan, and I look back on all the places I've been, from Almaty to the rugged canyon, to Shymkent, to Turkestan, to all these incredible places, I have continually had my cup refilled. Every time I think I've seen all there is to see in Kazakhstan, I see something completely different. And Nur Sultan is something completely different, but also very beautiful in its own way. Anyway, guys, that's it for me. This is the end of my series in Kazakhstan. If you're not from Kazakhstan, I hope you've learned a couple of things. I hope it's changed the way you think about this country. And if you are from Kazakhstan, I hope I didn't mess up your culture too bad, because this is a fascinating place, but it's a lot to take in. And I had a short amount of time here. But it's a time that I will never forget. And I can't wait to come back to Kazakhstan and explore some more. To keep refilling that cup, but only halfway. As always, guys, I'm Dan with the New Travel. I'll see you next time.
More of the world's population is now concentrated in cities than ever before. This is an in-depth look at how 7 of the most spectacular megacities around the world are managing that growth. Thanks to Dashlane for sponsoring this full-length video. To learn how to manage your online accounts securely, visit dashlane.com/TDC. The most successful metropolis in the history of the world has 39 million residents, 50% more people than any other urban area. It is the safest big city on the planet, and with a $2 trillion GDP, its economy is larger than all but 8 entire countries. This is Tokyo, Earth's model megacity. Our story begins 561 years ago, when a samurai warrior built a castle on the shore of a fishing village called Edo. Its rich soil was ideal for growing rice and attracted farmers from far and wide. In 1600, the great commander Tokugawa Ieyasu won the Battle of Sekigahara, a pivotal moment in history that secured Edo's status as the most important place in Japan. Unfortunately, the buildings of the expanding city were made of wood and paper, a dangerous combination to confront the warm winds of summer. Legend has it that on one particularly dry afternoon in 1657, a priest made the deadly mistake of burning an unlucky kimono. The fire flared up, ignited his temple, and engulfed 70% of the city. 100,000 people lost their lives. Despite the disaster, by the middle of the 19th century, Edo's population was in the millions. That's when the military shogunate system that had ruled for almost 700 years ended. A new government, led by a young emperor, finally made Edo the official capital of Japan. renamed it Tokyo, and made the castle his imperial palace. To celebrate his arrival, everyone toasted with rounds of sake on the house. Around this time, Japan opened up to foreign trade and influence, with Tokyo driving the Industrial Revolution that was modernizing the country. But rapid development had a cost: a strained natural environment. Forests were razed, pollutants choked the air, and Tokyo's once pristine waterways grew increasingly toxic. It was time for a more conscientious approach. The principle of Satoyama was born, promoting sustainable coexistence with nature, especially in the rice paddy fields covering Japan's sprawling foothills. Today, a century of conservation has resulted in parks covering 20% of the land in the Tokyo metropolitan area. But while the danger from pollution has been largely overcome, one natural phenomenon poses an unavoidable threat: earthquakes. In 1923, an 8.0 magnitude quake rocked Tokyo, devastating the geologically unstable eastern wards of the city. As firestorms engulfed whole neighborhoods, some took advantage of the chaos to target political enemies and minority groups, like Koreans. When the smoke finally cleared, 140,000 people had perished. Just 22 years later, in 1944, Tokyo was hit again, this time from above by Allied air forces who waged a relentless 9-month campaign that lasted until Japan's surrender to end World War II following America's detonation of 2 atomic weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On the worst night of the onslaught, 279 Boeing B-29 Superfortress heavy bombers dropped more than 1,600 tons of explosives on eastern Tokyo. It is regarded as the single most destructive bombing raid in human history, leaving more than 100,000 dead and more than 1 million homeless. It took generations for Tokyo to completely recover, but today, after more than 7 decades of peace, Tokyo is thriving. Its dense metropolitan area now stretches an incredible 32 uninterrupted kilometers, all the way to Japan's second largest city, Yokohama. While roads and highways are how many get around, the arteries that set Tokyo apart from other megacities are its extensive rail lines. After World War II, Japan didn't have access to the oil reserves and the automobile-focused transport system required, so the government wisely invested heavily in rail projects to connect central Tokyo with surrounding towns and cities. In October 1964, just in time for Tokyo to host the Summer Olympics, Japan debuted the world's first modern high-speed rail line to Osaka, the Tokaido Shinkansen, with trains reaching speeds of 256 kilometers per hour. Today, Tokyo's urban rail network serves a world-leading 40 million passengers a day. Compare that to America's car-dominated system, where space for roads and parking can take up to 60% of a city's available land. Of course, Tokyo has innovative ways of storing the cars that it does have, and its bikes. Congestion has also been eased by an $11 billion mega project. The Tokyo Bay Aqua Line is 1/3 bridge, 2/3 tunnel. It has turned what was a 90-minute drive through downtown and around the shore of the bay into a 15-minute sprint through it instead. The project took 30 years to design and complete because it has to withstand the ever-present danger of earthquakes. That's also why buildings in Tokyo cost an extra 50% to construct, and why they tend to be shorter than the skyscrapers in other economic capitals, 2 factors that drive up real estate prices and add to urban sprawl. From above, Tokyo seems like an unnavigable maze, but on the ground, life for many is lived locally within their own neighborhoods. Shops and businesses to obtain day-to-day essentials can usually be reached within a short walk, including many of the world's greatest sushi restaurants. Japan runs on seafood. Along Tokyo's harbor lies Tsukiji, the largest fish market on Earth. Every day, more than 50,000 people come to buy and sell 400 different types of seafood. Among the buyers are the chefs of the 227 restaurants with at least 1 Michelin star, making Tokyo the city with the most of these prestigious marks of excellence. In fact, when President Obama visited Tokyo, he ate handcrafted sushi prepared by the great Jiro himself. He also played football with a humanoid robot, just one example of how Japan is leading the global transition to automation. As a technology superpower, Tokyo is home to the most non-state-owned Fortune 500 companies of any city in the world, and, along with New York and London, is considered one of 3 command centers for the global economy. All of these factors make Tokyo the most advanced major city, and it's ready to put on a show for the entire world. In the summer of 2020, it will host the Olympic Games. This is motivating Tokyo's metropolitan government to use its massive annual budget, which is larger than the country of Saudi Arabia, to fast-track its progress. Among the achievements that are already complete, or that officials are hoping to showcase to the world, include a program to have functioning robots installed throughout the city to assist people regardless of age, nationality, or disability. The 920,000 expected daily visitors during the Olympics could ask nearby robots to help with language translation, directions, or transportation. Robots are just one example of how hosting the Games could benefit Tokyo's citizens long after the closing ceremony. With an aging population projected to peak in 2020 and then decline, Tokyo is experiencing a graying of its society on a scale that no city has experienced before. And because there will be less workers paying taxes and more elderly living on government pensions requiring care, the government is heavily encouraging volunteerism. This shouldn't be too hard for the citizens of Tokyo, some of the most considerate people on earth. They routinely rank first in helpfulness, ease of local public transportation, and cleanliness of streets. Amid the turmoil following the March 2011 earthquake, visitors praised Tokyoites for their orderliness. This is part of Gammon, the Japanese spirit of self-control, the dedication to the greater good through self-discipline. Of course, well-planned and maintained infrastructure is the main reason why Tokyo works so well. Recent and soon-to-be completed projects include a bold $350 million plan to jumpstart a hydrogen-powered transportation system by increasing the number of hydrogen stations from 8 to 35, while putting 6,000 fuel cell cars and 100 fuel cell buses on the road by 2020. A network of fuel cell vehicles, which can double as mobile electricity generators, could be a game changer in an emergency. Just 2 of these buses can power an entire hospital for a day. Other transportation upgrades include the 3-ring expressway that's cut many trips throughout the region in half, repairing and reinforcing bridges, tunnels, and roads using advanced laser scanning technology and carbon fiber, with the aim of detecting problematic infrastructure before it fails, while extending its life up to 100 years. Installing more solar heat blocking pavement that's up to 8 degrees Celsius cooler than asphalt helps solve Tokyo's heat island problem, a challenge faced by many other cities around the world. Transferring as many power lines underground as possible, widening sidewalks, doubling the amount of dedicated bike lanes, and opening outdoor cafes in an initiative dubbed the Tokyo Champs-Élysées Project. The city is aggressively reducing CO2 emissions through the first urban cap-and-trade system covering factories and commercial facilities like office buildings. To reduce the danger of heavy flooding from rainfall, massive underground chambers and tunnels have been installed to regulate and divert waters from rivers, channels, and sewers that have traditionally overflowed. These measures go hand in hand with an integrated series of flood wall gates, rain gauges, and river level monitoring cameras that are watched 24/7 by engineers at 2 command centers that can each operate the entire system remotely in case either one of them fails. With so much historical damage from fire, officials are pushing to replace old wooden houses with fireproof ones, creating entire zones where residents wouldn't have to evacuate during a nearby blaze, and ensuring that major routes are lined with fire and earthquake-proof buildings so emergency vehicles can move freely. Amplifying the appeal of hosting the Olympics is the opportunity to share these advancements with their guests, who are encouraged to implement these best practices in their own cities. Tokyo already does this by hosting and teaching foreign first responders the most advanced search and rescue techniques, sharing infrastructure best practices with officials visiting from abroad, and helping engineers from Kuala Lumpur update their waste management system. Tokyo is also a pioneer in land reclamation. With mountains hemming its growth, adding land to the bay is an increasingly attractive option, particularly if that land is made of trash. The Sea Forest area, for example, is a former landfill that is being converted to parkland and will even host Olympic events. In the coming years, population growth and rising seas will force the entire world to do more with less. And while Tokyo isn't perfect, by using its resources wisely, planning for the future, and sharing what it learns with the rest of the world, it should be a model for cities of all sizes everywhere. The dramatic cliffs and endless beaches of Rio de Janeiro makes it the city that probably first comes to mind when you think of Brazil. Sao Paulo, the largest metropolis in the southern hemisphere, is the true economic engine of the world's sixth most populous country. In 1554, Catholic missionaries, with the help of indigenous workers, built a small village perched 750 meters above sea level and 70 kilometers from the Atlantic coast. It was the only inland settlement in the country, a jumping off point for expeditions of conquerors, slave traders, and gold hunters. In the 1800s, Brazil became the world's leading coffee producer, but the farmers in Rio overcultivated their soil, giving Sao Paulo an opening to become the country's agricultural hub. As one of the few inland towns, it was closer than Rio to the plantations spread throughout the interior, and it was directly linked by rail to the port of Santos, making it the ideal junction for shipments of goods on their way to the coast for export. In 1888, Brazil's businesses adapted to another significant change when Emperor Dom Pedro II, regarded by many as the greatest Brazilian to ever live, convinced his people to abolish slavery. With their captive labor force suddenly free, farmers and industrialists turned to immigrants from abroad. Today, as a result, Sao Paulo has the largest population of Italian descendants of any city on the planet, including Rome, the largest Japanese community outside of Japan, and of course, significant numbers of Portuguese and Spanish. Many of these newcomers were skilled factory workers whose knowledge helped Sao Paulo emerge as a manufacturing capital during the Industrial Revolution and World War II. Over a period of less than 30 years, the city's population exploded from 250,000 to 1 million. Steady growth continued through the century, passing Rio in 1960. Today, the population of the megalopolis, known as Sampa, is over 20 million. In many ways, it is a thriving global city, with the largest stock exchange in Latin America, a vibrant culture with over 100 museums and dynamic performing arts spaces and beautiful parks. As part of football crazed Brazil, it proudly hosted matches during the 2014 World Cup and is making significant investments in the next generation, with 850,000 students enrolled in higher education courses. Unfortunately, though, Sao Paulo's rapid development has also taken a heavy toll, with 4 core problems rising above the rest. The city's only major bodies of water are the Tietê and Pinheiros rivers. As the population grew, the government, plagued by inefficiency and corruption, struggled to meet demand for basic infrastructure. Without enough wastewater treatment plants, sewage from millions of people flowed directly into the rivers. Toxic waste from industrial facilities was dumped without limit. When new highways were built, the city laid them on the only continuous stretches of land left, the riverbanks, and then hid stretches of them behind walls. But even if you can't always see the rivers, their stench doesn't go away. When the Tietê is at its most choked, it is a biological dead zone as far away as Barra Bonita, 260 kilometers downstream. It wasn't always this way. The rivers used to be gathering points for recreation, distant memories that are motivating current rehabilitation efforts, which include projects to treat 100% of all wastewater before it enters the Tietê, putting an end to all illegal dumping, and teaching people how to care for their rivers and streams. The second major challenge is that 10% of Paulistanos live in high-density makeshift neighborhoods called favelas. While the buildings are typically low quality, most favelas are vibrant working-class communities. Some settlements, however, are little more than squatter shacks without access to electricity, sewage, and running water. To give these people a better place to live while improving the overall quality of housing throughout Sampa, the city has spent billions of dollars on a variety of programs. One experiment allows low-income residents to purchase new government-built apartments for affordable monthly payments of less than $100. It's a win-win. Ownership helps people become more financially stable while incentivizing them to maintain these spaces.
This was my dream. I think it's almost as wonderful as having a new baby. It's all I expected it to be. It's not furnished yet the way I wanted, but I dearly love this apartment.
The downside is that the government has been building many of these projects far from the city center. Loreni has a 2-hour commute to work, and there are no local parks for her son to safely play with his friends. Lack of access to services plagues all of Sao Paulo because of how it developed. The best jobs are where the transportation network is concentrated in the city center. And since that's also the most expensive place to live, lower income people are pushed farther and farther out and have to spend more money, energy, and time getting around. The municipal government understands it must improve this situation and has unveiled an ambitious new master plan to better integrate lower income areas with parks, transportation hubs, and jobs. Like much of the world, Brazil has a growing gap between its wealthiest citizens and everyone else. The top 1% of Sao Paulo city residents owns 45% of the property. The master plan addresses this by mandating that private property owners who underutilize valuable city space need to either meet scheduled deadlines for putting that space to better use or pay a progressively costly urban property tax. The plan has been praised internationally. The real challenge will be overcoming the powers that be to make sure it is carried out. This brings us to Sao Paulo's third major problem, citywide traffic jams that steal tens of millions of productive minutes every day. In the last decade, the population increased 11%, but the number of cars grew 113%, 10 times as fast. Congestion is so bad that wealthy Paulistanos are flocking to the air, and the city now has the world's largest helicopter fleet. The ability of the wealthy and powerful to avoid their city's problems by literally flying over them has contributed to a sense of complacency among the leaders of Brazilian society. Like many other nations, it is now reckoning with the damage caused by politicians who put personal greed over the best interests of the people. An example of this is a shiny new high-speed rail line connecting Sao Paulo and Rio that the federal government promised to build in its winning bids for both the 2014 World Cup and 2016 Olympics. But 2 years after the flame left Rio, the rail project hasn't even broken ground. Paulistanos are fed up. Hundreds of thousands protested to demand solutions to the mobility crisis, forcing local officials to listen to people and integrate their best ideas into the master plan, like how best to expand the number of roads and metro lines, increase express bus routes, build networks of dedicated bike lanes, and concentrate housing near public transport hubs to maximize employment opportunities. Sao Paulo's most distressing challenge reached a critical point 4 years ago, when the region suffered the worst drought in its recorded history, as just half the rain fell from the previous driest year. Without water to wash dishes, high-end restaurants served guests on plastic plates, and cafes couldn't brew coffee. As panic set in, fighting erupted in the hardest-hit neighborhoods, and emergency water delivery trucks were robbed. As the city's main reservoir dropped below 5%, less than 3 weeks' supply, the military feared the water control center could be overtaken by an angry mob. One service engineer remembered those terrifying days. "We knew that when people don't have water, they go crazy. We imagined what they would be like here, with 21 million people." In the end, a storm arrived just in time to avoid catastrophe. Since then, other sources throughout the region have been tapped to give Sao Paulo a bit more supply when the next apocalyptic drought arrives. But some experts are warning that even more extreme dry spells loom on the horizon. The vast South American jungle has traditionally served as a biotic pump, circulating water down from the tropics through rivers in the sky that converge over southeastern Brazil, delivering reliable rains year in and year out. But decades of logging and agriculture have gutted hundreds of millions of acres of dense, mature trees, and every second, another 2 acres disappear. With less plants and soil catching and absorbing rainfall, there is less moisture evaporating as clouds into the airstream, and ultimately, less rain falling on Sao Paulo. The lifeblood of this megalopolis has been the 3 or 4 convergence rainfalls that have arrived like clockwork every year to fill the region's reservoirs. And as the frequency of these events becomes less reliable, so do the future prospects of the entire city. The remarkable fact is that 20% of the world's water is stored in Brazil, but the vast majority of it falls far to the north. With its rivers currently too polluted to drink from and development continuing to spread inland, there are limited options for bolstering its water supply by building costly dams or acquiring new sources through long canals. In the end, the people of Sao Paulo, just like the rest of us, are learning the fundamental lesson of the 21st century. To survive and thrive, our cities must embrace the most sustainable methods of development. The good news is that with a clever master plan and citizens dedicated to taking action, Sao Paulo is hard at work on the long-term solutions to deliver a better life for millions of people. The Sahara is home to the world's largest desert city. For centuries, this place has thrived alongside the world's longest river. The city of 1,000 minarets is the capital of the Arab world, a megalopolis with a population of 20 million people. This is Cairo, Egypt, the megacity of the Middle East. Born on the east bank of the Nile 5,000 years ago, Cairo dates back to the time of the first Egyptian pharaohs and iconic pyramids of the ancient city of Memphis. Much later, in 641, the Arab general Amr ibn al-As founded the town of Al-Fustat, the seed from which contemporary Cairo has grown. In 970, a walled city was established to protect its inhabitants from conquering armies. Over the next 400 years, it would grow to become the largest city in all of Africa, Europe, and Asia Minor. With almost 500,000 people, it was a key link in the lucrative spice trade, allowing it to thrive culturally and intellectually. Some of the earliest institutions of higher learning were established here at this time. The middle of the 14th century saw Cairo reach the pinnacle of its importance. Soon after, though, decline set in, as plagues like the Black Death began killing large portions of its population. Then, its spice trade monopoly was broken when Vasco da Gama sailed from Portugal to India, establishing an alternative sea route, undermining Cairo's economic importance. And, while under Turkish control, Cairo was relegated to just another provincial capital within the massive Ottoman Empire. Fast forward to the 1830s, when the urban growth that defines modern Cairo began. Influenced by the renovation of Paris, a European-style city was built to the west of the medieval core. Cairo entered its most rapid period of expansion in the 1950s, triggered by Colonel Nasser's revolution that ended 2,000 years of imperial rule in Egypt. That's when the city began sprawling northward into the fertile Nile River Delta, consuming valuable farmland. This growth was fueled by improvements in transportation and industrialization. Things like flood control allowed the riverfront to be developed, and bridges allowed people to settle on the area's islands and west bank. Just like we've seen with the other cities in this series, Cairo's development eventually reached a point of critical mass, where it suddenly became an attractive enough destination that people began arriving faster and faster and in larger and larger numbers. But unfortunately for Cairo, it was unprepared for this influx and couldn't grow fast enough to support them. Many of these newcomers had to make desperate choices about where to live. Today, 500,000 people live in the city of the dead, among row after row of tombs. More of Cairo's poor live in a place called Garbage City. Here, 70,000 Cairenes sort and recycle the 15,000 tons of trash that's created every day in the rest of the city. They actually provide a vital service and were even recognized as one of the most efficient sanitation operations in the whole world. An urban artist named El Said recently undertook a beautification project there and shared what he learned in a TED Talk.
The Zarek community was the ideal context to raise the topic of perception. We need to question our level of misconception and judgment we can have as a society upon communities based on their difference. The people of Cairo call them the Zabbalin, which means the people of the garbage. But ironically, the people of Manshiyat Nasser call the people of Cairo the Zabbalin. They say they are the one who produce the garbage, not them.
But even if you've got a home in Cairo, it's often built on shaky ground. Developers frequently ignore or bribe their way past rules that limit buildings to a height of 6 stories because of the oversaturated Nile River Delta land that serves as the city's foundation. This had tragic consequences in 1992 when an earthquake that collapsed numerous residential towers killed more than 600 people. Today, looking around Cairo from above also reveals that nearly all the rooftops are occupied by squatters who've made ramshackle homes on the only open space they could find. One of the ways the government dealt with overcrowding was to build a large subway system modeled after the Paris Metro. It now has 1 billion riders a year and has somewhat eased the brutal traffic congestion, but it brought the unintended consequence of encouraging even more people to move to the city. In response, the Egyptian government has tried to relocate people to gleaming new cities they are continually building on the outskirts of Cairo. But with bad transportation options to and from there, these cities become too expensive to move to and fall flat every time. 22 of these new towns already exist. Designed for millions and millions of residents, they collectively hold a little over 1 million. It seems the excitement and connectivity of urban Cairo will always be more attractive than a life lived in overpriced suburbs further out in the desert. But wealthy developers haven't gotten the message. They're driven by profit and prestige rather than doing what's best for Cairo. And Egyptian housing minister Mustafa Madbouli seems to be listening to them. He recently unveiled a $40 billion mega plan to build an entirely new capital east of the city. He argues the project is needed to ease congestion and overcrowding in Cairo. It attempts to follow in the footsteps of other purpose-built capitals we've seen, like Islamabad, Brasilia, and Canberra. At 700 square kilometers, it will be as big as Singapore and will aim to house at least 5 million residents. The project was originally led by the Emirati businessman behind the Burj Khalifa, although disagreements forced the Egyptians to turn to Chinese companies instead. This ambitious, risky project has many Egyptians wondering if it's the right way forward.
Working capital are they talking about? They should pay more attention to the poor and needy instead. Millions of Egyptians are unemployed, and the government wants to spend billions of dollars on a new capital.
The new capital city is a late decision. Here in Egypt, I don't know. Those in charge only start thinking after the problem has already happened.
Perhaps one of the reasons President El-Sisi is initiating the project has to do with what Cairo has just lived through. In 2011, the world was captivated by the Egyptian revolution, and millions took to the street demanding change. First, the 29-year rule of Hosni Mubarak ended. Then, the misguided and brief presidency of Mohamed Morsi was toppled by a coup led by the current president, El-Sisi. With a firm grip on power, it makes sense for El-Sisi to want to build himself a new capital, safely removed from the masses in Cairo, a city that is now home to nearly 1 in 4 Egyptians and is one of the fastest growing places in the world. In the next 30 years, its population is on pace to hit 40 million. One of the factors that's bringing so many people is climate change. While Cairo is removed from the coast, the Egyptian city of Alexandria isn't, and it's already feeling the effects of rising seas. NPR's Jane Araf recently traveled there to tell the story.
Egypt is one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change. Eventually, entire neighborhoods could be underwater. The Nile Delta is crucial to Egypt. More than half of its crops are grown in that triangle where the Nile spreads out and drains into the sea. In farmland along the Nile, diesel pumps bring up water for the river for irrigation. Recently, seawater is creeping in.
A coastline that is continually creeping inland will force more and more people to move to Cairo. This will amplify the pressure Cairo's leaders already feel. But solutions exist to manage its growth. As long as smart ideas prevail and Egypt's precious resources, be they land, water, or money, are used in the most efficient way. In a documentary that's several decades old now, visionary environmental consultant Munir Niamatollah made the case that, despite its size, Cairo can thrive.
Megacities really are an opportunity, they're not a burden. We have to look at megacities as a place where human beings are going to efficiently contribute something to mankind. The world now is not separated by national boundaries and cannot be separated by national boundaries, thank goodness. And that is very much because of megacities. Megacities are playing a very, very, very important role in promoting peaceful coexistence and in making sure that the very important issues that concern our planet, such as environment, are indeed exchanged, attended to, and acted upon.
What makes this place unique? It is the world's largest city at an elevation higher than 2,000 meters. With 21.2 million residents, it rivals New York City for the title of largest metropolis in the Americas, and it is one of the world's oldest continuously populated urban areas. But what truly sets this megalopolis apart is also its biggest challenge. It is the largest city on Earth without direct access to a significant body of water, although that wasn't always the case. This is an examination of Mexico City and the water crisis that threatens its continued prosperity. Nearly 7 centuries ago now, the Aztecs came across an island in the middle of a lake in a vast valley more than 2,000 meters above sea level, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest coast. 300 years later, a small group of Spanish explorers, led by Hernán Cortés, arrived, and what they found was a thriving capital city, the heartbeat of the Aztec Empire, with 300,000 souls. It was called Tenochtitlan, and it amazed the Europeans. Its labyrinth of canals, dividing a network of man-made islands, reminded them of Venice, and they wanted it for themselves.
There in the center of the lake was this gleaming white city. It was something they'd never seen before, and for us, we could almost imagine it as Dorothy looking at the window, at Oz for the first time. It was far larger, at 250,000 people, than any city they had ever seen in Europe.
Armed with superior weaponry and the most powerful exterminating agent, disease, the Europeans wiped the Aztecs out and systematically dismantled their great temples and pyramids. Then they set out to quickly build the most renowned city in the Americas. They rejected the Aztec way of living harmoniously with the land and instead filled their canals, destroyed their floating farms, and drained water from the lake until it was completely empty. This set the city on a collision course with nature. Over time, it has grown to cover the entire lake bed and well beyond. And because 2 volcanoes, one of them still active, loom over the city from the south, the soil is a mix of clay from the lake and volcanic rock. That's an unusual foundation to build a sprawling, heavy concrete jungle on, and it's why the city is sinking. But people keep on arriving, because the defining feature of Mexico City is centralism, the idea that all paths lead here. What used to be trails converging on grassy highlands became dirt roads used by carts and donkeys loaded with goods, and are now the arterial roads that move millions. The explosion of Mexico City's population, like other megalopolises around the world, follows the widespread adoption of the motor vehicle. In 1950, its population was 3.1 million. As paved highways became more common, it jumped to 5.5 million by 1960, then nearly tripled to 14 million inhabitants by 1980. This boom has exacerbated the city's 2 most urgent challenges, bringing in enough water for 21 million people, while simultaneously sending away the millions of liters of wastewater they produce each day. The city is failing on both fronts. Now, it's worth noting that crime is not Mexico City's most pressing concern. It can be a dangerous place, but the reality is that while the country has seen its murder rate rise as drug cartels battle for territory, the federal district has some of the lowest crime rates in Mexico. It has installed more than 22,000 surveillance cameras throughout its 16 boroughs and put thousands more police officers on the street. Increased security keeps violent crime in check and creates opportunities for educated and artistically inclined young people from the surrounding states. It's a young, vibrant place with an economy that accounts for 1/4 of the country's GDP while holding more than 1/5 of its population. That's one of the highest capital to national ratios in the world. Centralism, remember? Its neighborhoods are diverse and flow endlessly into one another. One minute it feels like you're in Paris, turn the corner and it's Manhattan, but just a few streets over lie the rundown avenidas of Tijuana. Above all, though, it's crowded. Mexico City is the most congested place in the world. Although it has an excellent 12-line metro system that's cheap enough for anyone to ride, its 5 million cars snarl the roadways on the streets above. Which brings us back to the water crisis. The city experiences a powerful 1-2 combination that amplifies the intense droughts and downpours that come with climate change. A gigantic concrete slab situated at the bottom of a valley surrounded by mountains that block in pollution. It's a heat sink that speeds up evaporation while preventing rainwater from entering the water table below. So the city had been counting on its Grand Canal to expel 280 cubic meters of wastewater a second from its overflowing sewers. But it relies on gravity to pull the water away. As the city sinks, the canal becomes less and less effective. Today it works at just 30% of capacity. The ever-shifting ground also means that many of the 8,000 miles of pipes delivering drinking water leak, resulting in the devastating loss of up to 40% of what's originally pumped up from freshwater sources many miles away. And that's just the situation for the residents lucky enough to have a constant supply. 20% or more of Mexico City residents can't even count on water flowing from their taps every day. This has created an incredibly inefficient system where fleets of trucks fill up their tanks and drive to deliver to customers by hose, house by house. That's an expensive way to live, and it's why many low-income families have to spend 10% of their monthly income for just 10 gallons of water per person per day.
In Iztapalapa, there are 1,000 trucks distributing water to 2 million people, which is nowhere near enough to meet the needs of those people.
It's expensive, inefficient, and customers like Silvestre Fernandez, a struggling cab driver, are not satisfied. Sometimes it takes 1 or up to 5 days after we request it. And sometimes we can't buy other things, like diapers for the baby, because we have to pay for water.
Meanwhile, residents living in the wealthy neighborhoods consume 100 gallons on average a day from their free-flowing taps and pay just 1/10 the price. This rampant inequality amplifies the destabilizing effects of climate change, and water-starved communities like these exist all over the world, which is exactly why the US Pentagon calls climate change a threat multiplier. The director of Mexico City's water system explains what a severe drought could mean. Quote, "We're facing a potential disaster. There is no way we can provide enough trucks of water to deal with that scenario. There is a serious possibility of unrest." One study says up to 10% of Mexico's population could eventually head north if droughts and floods get out of control. The recent migrant crisis in Europe underlines how difficult it is to stop hundreds of thousands of people who are fleeing for their lives from crossing borders, seas, and yes, even fences and walls. To help solve problems like this, Mexico City's local government is gaining more power to govern itself. It clearly needs it. The deeply unpopular President Peña Nieto has simultaneously cut off funding for Mexico City's water fixes, even as he advocates for a multi-billion-dollar new mega airport in a part of the city, a dry lake bed, that could make the water problem worse. There's no easy solution to this ongoing problem, but Mexico City has no shortage of smart people eager to get the job done. One of the longer-term solutions could be the widespread adoption of rainwater harvesting that's being tried in some states.
Rainwater harvesting is actually quite a simple thing. What we do is the rainwater that falls on the roof of the house, we channel it to a cistern and we pass through a very simple process that first flushes the water and filters it. Why are we pumping water from over here when we're having water falling on us from the sky for free in huge abundance? We just haven't known up until now how to take advantage of it.
Every urban center has its monuments, its history, its skyline. But great cities are more than buildings. Great cities have a pulse. And few megacities capture the complexity, chaos, and vitality of a living system more vividly than New York. Yet, for a place so deeply embedded in American culture, its fascinating origins often go overlooked. After all, no city becomes the celebrity's playground, the city that never sleeps, the melting pot, the mother of exiles, and the American dream overnight. While it is no longer the largest metropolis on Earth, it is still the most influential. But as this fast-paced, capitalist mecca matures, it's confronting a unique set of challenges. Let's take a bite out of the Big Apple, America's megacity. One of the most remarkable things about this concrete jungle is how quickly it's sprouted up. Compared to the other two megacities we've profiled so far, New York is relatively young. Less than 400 years ago, the city looked like this. In 1609, the island of Manhattan was found by an expedition. Its leader, Henry Hudson, realized immediately that it was a geographical gem, the ideal location to build a city. A large river ran along its entire western shore, and on its eastern edge was a narrow estuary connected to a large bay. Its southern tip was flanked by 2 more large bays and dozens of islands, including the much larger Long Island, which shields Manhattan from ocean storms. And as we saw in our previous explorations of Mexico City and Bangladesh, containing and distributing clean water to residents is often a keystone challenge for dense urban centers. On this front, however, New York City reaps the benefits of nature. Direct contact with water ensures reliable access, while elevated terrain spares it from excessive flooding. But back to the 17th century. After word reached Europe that Hudson had discovered what he called as pleasant a land as one can tread upon, the mercantilist-minded Dutch sent 30 families to build a settlement called New Amsterdam. In exchange for some metal kettles, axes, and cloth, the Native Americans who hunted throughout the area gave the Dutch the island. Slaves were immediately brought in to begin building the town. The town's population reached 700 in 1664, but it still wasn't receiving very much support from the crown back in Holland. So English King Charles II swooped in and, with 4 warships, captured the town without resistance. He then gave the colony to his brother, the Duke of York, and you can guess what they called it. By the end of the 18th century, New York had become an important port city. Then came the Revolution that changed everything. In 1776, New York joined the other American colonies and declared independence from the English. After getting kicked out of Boston, the British responded by sending an entire fleet of redcoats to seize and occupy New York, which they held for 7 years until George Washington led his victorious rebel army back into the city. After the war, New York briefly served as the capital of the newly formed United States until the federal government moved to the more centrally located District of Columbia. It's fascinating how that came about. The decision was ultimately up to President Washington, but he left it up to his 2 right-hand men to figure out. In a backroom deal, brokered by James Madison over dinner, Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton of New York agreed to allow the nation's capital to move south to Northern Virginia, the home state of Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson. In exchange, Jefferson agreed to support Hamilton's financial plan, which included the creation of a powerful central bank. Soon after, the New York Stock Exchange was established, laying the groundwork for Lower Manhattan to become the financial capital of the world. Today, it's home to the 2 largest stock exchanges by total market capitalization. A couple more events in the early 1800s helped accelerate the city's growth. A grid pattern of streets was laid out, providing an organized plan of expansion to the north, and the opening of the Erie Canal in 1825. This increased New York's importance as an export center of goods, agricultural products, and raw materials that could now be easily transported from the resource-rich Great Lakes region. Around this time, the city became the gateway to America, as large numbers of German and Irish immigrants arrived. Between 1820 and 1850, New York's population quadrupled. Many of these newcomers had to settle in tenement houses without proper sanitation or clean water. Diseases like cholera, typhoid, and smallpox became rampant. The construction of the Croton Aqueduct, one of the world's first great modern water distribution systems, helped to solve this problem, and hygiene began to immediately improve. In order to preserve the fast-growing city's connection to the environment, a 600-acre area of swampland and squatters' shacks was set aside for preservation and eventually transformed into Central Park. Today, it's the most visited urban park in the country. Heading into the 1860s, slavery was deeply dividing the northern and southern states. New York was the epicenter of the abolition movement. When the Civil War began in 1861, after Abraham Lincoln was elected president, a riot broke out as angry white mobs attacked blacks who they blamed for low wages and the war. Hundreds were killed. Despite the unrest, the city's economic engine roared as it became the center of the abolition movement. When the Civil War began in 1861, after Abraham Lincoln was elected president, a riot broke out as angry white mobs attacked.
Sponsored by Squarespace. This is a $200 apartment in Tokyo. So it's often said that living in Tokyo is really expensive, or that apartments are really expensive, which is probably a fair statement. But if you look hard enough, you can find some really inexpensive places. And that's what I'm going to show you in this video. I'm going to be searching for a $200 apartment. And luckily, the people at Nice Reviews have agreed to help me out with this search. But before we start, if you want to see what I'm doing on the daily, check out my Instagram account. If you want help with the channel, check out the Tokyo merch. And if you guys have any questions about Japan or Japan travels, check out my Discord community. That said, let's go find our $200 apartment.
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So I really want to see a place under $200.
$200 in Tokyo?
Yes.
Okay, it's quite there. Well, I can find.
All right, let's go. The first apartment is a 9-minute walk away from Tobu Nerima Station, which is a 17-minute train ride from Ikebukuro, so it's kind of on the outskirts of central Tokyo. But the neighborhood sure is pleasant. Many restaurants and shops, pretty much everything you need without having to go to another station. But let's see inside the apartment before we start calling buildings. So this 9.9 square meter studio, about 106 square feet, was built in 1950, so more than 70 years ago. This is the first apartment. So excited to show you what it's like. Let's go inside now. Although it has a shared toilet, there is no bath, so if you're staying here, a local bathhouse or gym membership is probably your best bet if you like taking baths every day. Quick note, Japanese apartments generally have upfront costs, such as deposits, which you probably get back when you move out, while guarantee fees, agent fees, and key money is out of your pocket and never to be seen again. Also, some apartments may have monthly management fees, so be sure to factor that in. Okay, so this is what a $200 apartment would look like in Tokyo. Let alone it's on the outskirts of Tokyo, it is still $200. It has a lot of personality. So when you first get in here, you can see that it's about 4.5 tatami mats, less than 10 square meters. But first of all, let me just take you to the entrance area. Just walking into the left-hand side, you have this kitchen sink area. I believe that works just fine. Being that it is a Japanese apartment, you do have this area here. It's not an entrance area where you just sleep on here. So you can see the floor here. It's a little bit unsteady. The stone entrance here is a little bit cracked, and so when you step on it, it does sink in a little bit, which is a little bit scary, especially since Japan is earthquake prone. So it does have a light here that works properly, so that's pretty nice. And then I believe these like spigots here, these little nozzles, are for connecting to gas stoves. So you can probably put just like a little gas stove here. Interestingly, the apartment comes with its own room as well. The door itself has 2 built-in locks, which I guess is nice. You have a doorknob lock, and then you have the chain lock above. Moving on into this room, you have space for a desk, you have space for a bed, just enough space for yourself. It looks like the tummy mats are just a little bit warm, so you just gotta, I guess you just live with that. And the wall itself has just a lot of history. If you just look around, you can see something must have happened here at one point here as well. And here you do have some closet space. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a clothes hanger, but I'm assuming that if you reached up here, you could put your own bar if you really needed to. It looks like the door is just right here. So if you needed to close your closet, then the door is right here just for you. The room does have 2 outlets, so if you didn't go plug in some of your electronics, then this would be the place. Unfortunately though, I don't think there are any other electrical outlets around this place, so you're gonna have to use this and maybe use a power strip to get your electricity all around the room. But the positive thing is the room is not that big, so you don't need a long extension cord. So it does look like this apartment has fiber built in. So if you do want internet, you can probably install a router here and get a fiber connection. So if you are a gamer and just want to game all day, you can probably do it here. What's also nice is that it's a corner room, so you get 2 windows on each side. Let's open this and see what the view looks like. So I guess this one that looks right into the wall. Let's see what that one looks like. Surprisingly, the window is really big. You can actually feel like it goes all the way down to my neighbor, which is pretty nice. Oh, it looks like it even has a landline here, so if you wanted to connect to the land phone, you can do it. The ceiling too also has a lot of characteristics. If you just kind of look up, you can see that it has different shades, maybe from over the years, and maybe some kind of water, moisture, damage, and then there's even a hole over there. What's also interesting about this place is that the walls, it looks like it's made from a sand and paper mix. It's really amazing how it's lasted over the years. Also, this apartment doesn't have an AC, so probably in the winter it's going to be really cold, and in the summer it's going to be really, really hot. Nice, even the lights work. So that's pretty much all I can show you in this room, but it also does come with a shared toilet, so let me show you that right now. Wow, so this place comes with a full-on Japanese toilet to share with all the other people living in this apartment building. But the bright side is that it's pretty clean. But that's pretty much what you get here in Tokyo for $200. Now, if you want to go a little bit closer to central Tokyo, then you're going to have to pay a little bit more. Let me show you that spot next. Let's go. Before I continue on, I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor for this video, Squarespace. If you don't already know, Squarespace is the #1 way to build your online presence. In fact, I use Squarespace to build my website, Tokyo Zebra. Here are just some of the reasons why I love Squarespace so much. Whether you're starting your passion project or building a business, Squarespace has all the tools to get it done while also looking ultra sleek and professional at the same time. They support numerous portfolios and gallery designs that you can customize and even password protect so the right people see your work. Use its fully integrated blogging tools and commenting features such as thread comments, replies, and likes to help engage your community. And my favorite, built-in analytics to see how your visits, unique visitors, and page views trend over time. So go to squarespace.com today for your free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Paolo from Tokyo and get 10% off your first domain or website. That said, let me show you the next apartment. This next place I'm taking you is only a 2-minute walk from Nakai Station, a 10-minute train ride from Shinjuku Station, so the location itself is a lot closer to central Tokyo. So this next place is just a little bit more expensive. Let me show you inside. Alright, so when you first walk in, you can see that there's like an old school closet here for your shoes. Look at that, it opens from the top. Alright, so here's the room. Let's go inside. Nice! The room number is handwritten. I do love these personal touches. Wow, look at this room. This 9.5 square meter studio is 24,000 yen, about $225 a month, and was built in 1972, so it's almost 50 years old. So this is what you get for 24,000 yen. Let me show you around this place a little bit to kind of show you all of the different features. Basically, you have about 4.5 tatami mats, and this is real tatami mats right here. First, you have the closet area. You have 2 different levels, and what's kind of nice, it looks like it has some closing curtains here, so that you can hide it. It is a little bit difficult to open and close. Magnets don't stick very well. Looks like it even comes with some hangers here. Then just above, you have some more storage space, so I guess you can put, like your suitcase or anything in there that you don't really access so much. Over here, this is kind of like your kitchen area. This one has a sink. It's actually running, but it doesn't look like it has warm water. The lights don't work right now, but I'm assuming that if you did move in here, you could turn on electricity for you. So there you go. And this here is where you can put your stove. You can actually buy a separate stove, put it right here. There's some storage just below, like that. It's a decent amount of space. I guess you can put all of your plates and cups and everything. It looks like that's the power right there. From right here, you have the cable running down, and I believe it's for a television set. So if you do want to get some Japanese TV, then the cable runs all the way here. You can plug it in. One thing that I love, plugging all of my IT stuff inside of my rooms. This place, 2 outlets right here for you to use. Hopefully that's enough. But yeah, you can see that this place is this wide. So you could potentially fit a desk here and then like a small bunk, maybe a small single bed. That's probably like about it. Here, interestingly, it comes with its own curtain. I'm assuming you can switch out to your own favorite curtain. And look, they even have a telephone cable just right here. But who uses landlines these days anyway? And the room has its own window. We are on the second floor, so should be an alright view. Let's open up and see. Look at that. And just through the window here, you can see the umeboshi shop that we saw earlier. At least some sun does get into this room. Fukuba does have kind of this window where people can kind of maybe see even inside if the light is on. One thing on this room doesn't have an AC, so it'll probably be really cold in the winter and super, super hot in the summer. So another thing about this apartment building is that it doesn't have its own shower or bath unit, so you're gonna have to go outside if you're gonna want to do that. But it does have a shared toilet. Let me show you that now. Okay, so we have 2 different doors here. Let's see what's behind door number 1. Wow, so this toilet doesn't look like the cleanest thing in the world. Let's see door number 2. So it looks like this one is a lot cleaner than the first one. But the positive thing is that it has 2 toilets. So that's pretty much the tour of this entire place. That's everything that you would expect with this type of price. But I know that some of you are probably looking for something, say with this own apartment. So let me show you one of those places right now. Let's go. Oh, so we're close. While she parks the car, let me show you around the station. So this last one is a 2-minute walk from Takenotsuka Station, which is about a 30-minute train ride from Ueno. So it's pretty far from central Tokyo and rather close to Saitama, although more expensive than the previous 2 apartments and exacts several months of initial fees. A place like this in central Tokyo would fetch a far higher monthly rent. So I just arrived at the apartment. It's just over here. Let's go. This 15.3 square meter apartment was built in 2017, so it's new and even better clean. Alright, so it's just right ahead. This door is a lot nicer than the ones we saw earlier. Oh, wow. Wow, this room is a lot nicer. It's a double the price. It is just super clean in here. So let me give you a tour of this place. I feel like, I don't know, I just feel a lot safer in this place, especially since we just had an earthquake recently. It's actually 5 square meters larger than the previous 2 places. It just feels like a lot more space here. When you enter this place, it does have some security, so there is an auto lock at the entrance, so no one can just come into this place. You actually have to type in a code or use a key to get in. And if you look right here, there's a display. If you have any guests come over, their face will come up on the screen. And also it has an air conditioner because it has an air conditioning unit, which we didn't see in the previous 2 places. In the summer or the winter, you should be covered. Just looking at the room, I can already see 3 to 4 outlets, which is nice. If you do have electrical items, you should be covered on all sides of the wall. This is a whole kind of centered area, and you can see my entire body. The ceiling is a little bit lower, but that's because it does have a lot of rooms. We'll get to in a second. We have this kind of cool blue wall. I guess it's pretty cool. You can pull down these 2 bars right here, put a pole, and you can hang your clothes here if you really want to dry it, because it does have an air conditioning unit with a dryer function, so you don't have to hang your clothes outside. Also, if you come over here, there's actually a place where you can put a washing machine. So if you want to wash your clothes, you don't have to go to like a coin laundry or anything outside. You can do it all in here. And then you can also have your own kind of kitchen right here. It's like a one-piece set. You have the sink, you have the infrared heater as a stove. Although it's just 1 IH heater here, it should be enough if you're a single person and you don't do like a lot of cooking, but you do want to heat things up. And if you look underneath, there's space for your pots and your pans, your plates and your cups. It even has this little nippy holder for your knives. Oh look, this sink also has hot and cold water, which is really convenient. And unlike the other two places, this one has its own private toilet. Let me show you. What's pretty impressive about this toilet is that it's one of those Japanese toilets. So it has all of the bidet functions, which is, very, very convenient for those that don't like to use a lot of paper. And it also has its own built-in water faucet. By using the same water that you use to wash your hands, it fills the toilet to save water. And plus, this place also has a shower room, so let me show you that. So what you'll find in a lot of Japanese apartments is that they'll have a shower unit, plus it'll have a bath unit as well. This place kind of saves space than just has a shower unit. Personally, it's something that I prefer to save space. I'd rather use the space that's taken by the bath as a living space. So personally, I love just having a shower room by itself. Now let's have a quick minute review of what we see. Looks like a wall outside. Let's check the other window. Okay, so this view is a little bit better. You can actually see some sun from this angle. And just looking above, this place has a smoke and gas detector. I don't even remember seeing one in the other two places. That all said, let me take you to the loft area. Wow. Alright, so this place is just enough to have a bed. You can use it either as storage or you can probably put a bed up here. But as you can see that it's not a lot of height. In fact, if I were to sit straight up, I'd hit my head. But it's quite spacious width-wise. In fact, it's the same width as the downstairs. So you can probably fit a queen bed up here. And what's nice is that it has an electrical outlet. So if you wanted to, you can charge your phone or whatever electrical device you had. If I were to lie down completely like this, see there's not a lot of space here. And if you had a mattress, you'd be like this high, so you would really, really be facing the ceiling. So this is what you get for $500. Granted that it's on the outskirts of Tokyo, I wanted to show you an apartment that had its own private shower as well as its own private toilet. I think if you wanted to have something a little closer to Tokyo or